What if the biggest mystery in Silo isn't why people were forced underground? What if it's who made that decision and why they never intended anyone to learn the truth? For 3 seasons, we've been focused on Juliette's journey, whether the outside world is really toxic, why people are sent out to clean, and who keeps rewriting history inside the silo. But Season 3 is shifting the mystery in a completely different direction, because now we know one thing for certain. Silo 18 isn't unique. It's just one of 51 massive underground cities, all built as part of the same project. And once you realize that, the obvious question isn't whether the founders lied. It's who the founders were actually working for. Think about it for a second. Building a single underground city capable of supporting thousands of people for centuries would already be one of the largest engineering projects in human history. Now multiply that by 51. We're talking about tunnels stretching for miles, self-sustaining farms, massive generators, water systems, surveillance networks, advanced life support technology, and enough supplies to keep generations alive long after the surface collapsed. That isn't the work of one billionaire. It isn't even the work of one government. It's the kind of project that only a powerful organization operating in complete secrecy could pull off. And that's exactly where Season 3 begins to pull back the curtain. The flashbacks don't just show us the world before the apocalypse. They introduce politicians, military officials, journalists, and powerful people who already seem to know far more than everyone else. They aren't reacting to disaster, they're preparing for it. That small difference changes everything. Because if the people behind the silos knew what was coming before anyone else, then the apocalypse may not have been the beginning of their plan. It may have been the moment their real plan finally started. And that's where the idea of a hidden shadow government begins to make sense. Not a government elected by ordinary people. Not the presidents or congressmen everyone sees on television. But a small group operating behind closed doors, making decisions that would shape humanity for centuries, while the rest of the world had no idea what was happening. We've already seen hints of this throughout the series: the strict population control, the forbidden relics, the carefully rewritten history, the ban on curiosity, the mysterious safeguard capable of destroying an entire silo. None of these systems exist simply because people needed protection from the outside world. They exist because someone wanted absolute control over the people inside. And control on that level doesn't happen by accident. It has to be designed. Every law, every camera, every lie, every ritual, even something as simple as cleaning the sensor outside the silo suddenly feels less like a survival procedure and more like a part of a much larger system built to keep every generation believing exactly the same story. The question is no longer whether the residents are prisoners. The real question is, who built the prison? And more importantly, are they still watching? Because if Season 3 follows the path laid out by Hugh Howey's novels, then we're about to discover that the people running the silos were never just trying to save humanity. They were trying to decide what kind of humanity deserved to survive. And once you understand the organizations secretly pulling the string behind all 51 silos, almost every mystery in the series, from judicial to IT, from the cleaning ritual to Bernard's true role, starts fitting together like pieces of the same puzzle. So let's start at the beginning. Who actually built the 51 silos? And why was the truth buried deeper than the people themselves? Before we can understand who controls the silos, we have to answer an even bigger question. Why build 51 of them in the first place? If the goal was simply to survive an apocalypse, one enormous underground city would have been enough. Maybe 2 or 3 spread across different parts of the country as a backup. But 51? That isn't survival planning. That's infrastructure. Someone expected humanity to be divided long before the first person ever stepped inside a silo. And Season 3's flashbacks are beginning to reveal exactly how that happened. We're introduced to Donald Keene, a congressman with an engineering background who appears to be connected to the early stages of the Silo project. At first, he doesn't come across as a villain. In fact, he seems like someone who's only been told part of the story. He's aware that something terrible is unfolding. He knows national security is becoming a growing concern. But even Donald doesn't seem to know the full purpose of what he's helping to build. That detail is incredibly important, because it suggests the people designing the silos worked on a strict need-to-know basis. Engineers knew how to build them. Politicians approved funding. Military leaders handled security. Scientists developed the technology. But almost no one understood the complete picture. That's exactly how real-world classified operations work. The fewer people who know the truth, the easier it becomes to protect the secret. And according to Hugh Howey's novels, that's where one man enters the story: Senator Thurman. Without diving too deeply into future spoilers, Thurman isn't just another politician. He's the architect behind a plan that stretches far beyond building underground shelters. His vision wasn't simply to save civilization after a catastrophe. It was to reshape civilization from the ground up. That explains why every silo operates almost identically. Every sheriff follows similar laws. Every mayor answers to the same invisible system. Every IT department holds unusual authority. Even history itself is rewritten until each generation forgets there was ever another way to live. None of that happens naturally over 300 years. It has to be maintained, and someone has to keep maintaining it. That's where Bernard's role suddenly becomes much more interesting. For 2 seasons, Bernard looked like the man in charge. He controlled the servers. He had access to secret rooms. He knew about the existence of other silos. He even possessed knowledge that ordinary citizens couldn't imagine. But the Season 2 finale quietly revealed something surprising. Bernard isn't at the top of the chain. He's just another manager following instructions left behind by people who died centuries ago. He's protecting rules he didn't create, following protocols he barely understands. And that's exactly how powerful systems survive. The people change. The institution doesn't. Think about governments, intelligence agencies, or massive corporations. CEOs retire. Presidents leave office. Directors are replaced. Yet the organization continues operating because the system itself becomes more important than any individual inside it. The silos function the same way. Whoever founded this project didn't need to stay alive forever. They only needed to build a machine capable of enforcing their rules long after they were gone. And that's exactly what they accomplished. Every generation inherits the same laws, the same fear, the same myths, the same carefully controlled version of history. The founders may be dead, but their government never disappeared. It simply went underground. And if that's true, then the biggest threat to the entire system isn't the toxic air outside. It's someone like Juliette Nichols, someone willing to ask questions the founders spent centuries trying to erase. Because once one person discovers the truth, the lies holding all 51 silos together could begin collapsing one after another. The terrifying truth about Operation 50 and what Season 3 is really setting up. Now here's where the story takes a much darker turn. Up until now, you could argue that the founders made difficult choices for the sake of survival. Maybe the lies were necessary. Maybe strict rules kept humanity alive. Maybe controlling information prevented chaos. But one detail changes that entire argument. The silos weren't designed just to preserve humanity, they were designed to judge it. This is where the books introduce the idea behind Operation 50, the secret project that sits at the heart of the entire silo universe. The public would have believed the silos were emergency shelters, built to protect people from a global catastrophe. But behind closed doors, the people running the project had another objective. They didn't want to save everyone. They wanted to decide who should rebuild the world. Instead of putting all of humanity in one place, they divided survivors into separate silos, completely isolated from one another. Every community developed its own culture, leadership, traditions, and way of thinking, while never realizing that 50 other societies were living the exact same experiment. That's why communication between silos was never allowed. If people started comparing their histories, the lies would fall apart almost instantly. Imagine discovering that another silo tells a completely different version of the founders, or that another community celebrates holidays you've never heard of. Or worse, that another silo knows the truth about the outside world. Suddenly, everything you've believed for your entire life would become impossible to trust. That's exactly what the architects of the project were trying to prevent. Knowledge wasn't the real danger. Knowledge spreading was. And that's why the safeguard exists. At first, the safeguard sounds like a defense mechanism against outside threats. But when you think about it, it serves a completely different purpose. If one silo rebels, if one population uncovers too much, if one community can no longer be controlled, the system is prepared to erase that silo completely before its ideas spread to the others. That's not survival, that's population management. And once you realize that, Bernard's actions throughout the series become much easier to understand. He isn't protecting people from the outside, he's protecting the system from the truth. Every decision he makes, from hiding relics to controlling judicial and keeping forbidden files locked away, is driven by one belief, that order is more important than freedom. Ironically, Bernard probably sees himself as the hero. From his perspective, one person's curiosity could destroy generations of stability. The tragedy is that Juliette sees the exact opposite. She believes people deserve the truth, even if that truth changes everything. That's why these two characters are so compelling. Neither of them thinks they're the villain. One fights to preserve the system, the other fights to expose it. And Season 3 is about to push that conflict further than ever before, with more flashbacks revealing how the silos were created and more answers about the people who planned humanity's future centuries earlier. The series is finally moving away from one simple mystery, is it safe outside, and toward a much larger one. Can a civilization built on lies ever survive the truth? Because if the books are any indication, the greatest enemy isn't the poisoned air, it isn't the failing generators. It isn't even the people living in the other silos. The real enemy is an idea that has survived for over 300 years, the belief that ordinary people should never be trusted to choose their own future. And that's what makes Silos such a fascinating story. It isn't just about escaping an underground bunker. It's about breaking free from a system so carefully designed that generations of people accepted a prison without ever realizing they were living in one. As Season 3 continues, one thing becomes clear. Juliette isn't just fighting for Silo 18 anymore. She's challenging the legacy of the shadow government that created all 51 silos. And if that legacy finally begins to crumble, the biggest revelation in Silo won't be what happened to the world above. It'll be discovering that humanity's future was planned long before the apocalypse ever arrived. So here's the question. Do you think the founders were truly trying to save humanity? Or were they building the perfect system of control from the very beginning? Let me know your theory in the comments, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.